Well, hello, my friends, and welcome back to Discipleship in the Marketplace. I'm really excited about this conversation today with my friend Brittney Rossie. Brittney is a brand specialist and business coach. She is helping people lay the foundations for their business and design a life that they love on their own terms, and kind of mixing up business. You also do a lot of ministry. You're in the discipleship space. That's honestly how we met about a year and a half ago now, which is wild. You were in a season of transition, but you were kind of essentially heading a group that was talking to entrepreneurs and how to incorporate this idea of discipleship in the entrepreneurial space. So very well-versed, very well-rounded overall here. So I know you're going to have a lot of great value to add today. So thank you so much for joining me.
Well, that was very generous, but thank you. I'm so grateful to be here and be a part of the conversation.
Thank you. So, yeah. Well, let's jump into it.
Okay.
So you, like I said, you do a little bit of everything here. You're an entrepreneur, you run a business, also very passionate. And just because we have talked, I know how passionate you are about discipleship and really, man, it's always so inspiring to talk to you about that. So give me a little bit of a background of where this comes from. You know, what makes you you?
Yeah. So a little bit of my story is that if you've heard any of the podcasts with Alex, you know that we have a little bit of background in missions, overseas missions. We were church planting, and our heart was to see people reach with the gospel and make disciples where there weren't any. And so in that season, we didn't have kids, we didn't have pets, we were living really remotely. There wasn't a lot to go do where we lived. So I was like, well, how can I best leverage my time? Mm-hmm. And I started looking into like digital nomad, online business, marketing, things that I could do for our own visibility and communication stuff for missions and ministry. And that was the gateway to me learning about online business. I started my business in 2015 while we were on the mission field in our downtime. And since then, I have explored all things marketing, branding, and it grew. And because we were still doing full-time missions and I was doing this business thing on the side, I really got out of whack with our rhythms of life. We were just driving really hard at a lot of things. And we ended up back in the States and we realized we needed to make some adjustments, but honestly, I wasn't super sure how to do that. And I joined some coaching programs and they did not have a spiritual lens in them. It was just the mechanics of business and sales and those things are great. Yeah. And they gave me great skills and tools, but it wasn't until I encountered a discipleship thing for entrepreneurs. It's called Uptick. And that's where we met as well, Uptick. And it really gave me this piece of entrepreneurship through the lens of discipleship and how to sit better in this intersection of faith and business. And I have loved all the conversations that sit in this lane ever since then. Yes. And so that's a little bit of the context and why I care so much about how to bring in faith into a context that a lot of people don't necessarily have access to if they're not an entrepreneur or business owner in the marketplace.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Why is that intersection so important to you?
Well, goodness, that's where the people are.
Which is the main point, right?
Yeah. And so sometimes when we come from a very highly churched background, it can start to feel very insular. And in some ways, that's very healthy to have a community around you that is like-minded in values and is going to encourage you and like walk with you in an accountable way. And at the same time, we get a little too insular and we forget to live in the world and not be of the world. And so being in the marketplace forces interaction with the people in your community that you would not necessarily come into contact with otherwise. And so that's why I love it.
Yeah, that's so good. So how have you personally seen this play out in your business?
That's a great question. So it's a little bit funny, but when I first started, I was so afraid of failing that I didn't want anybody in my network to know I was starting a business. And so I just marketed it in like Facebook groups and on social media platforms where I felt like nobody would really see what I was doing in case like it felt icky or something like that.
Yeah,
I was incognito. And so as a result of that, I wasn't super front facing about my faith. I was just trying to do like logos and email marketing things. And I was like, well, I can work with anybody doing this. And when people would ask me like personal questions as I'm working with them in a client capacity. Well, what do you think about doing business this way? I would get the opportunity to say, well, I'm a person of faith. And so I make a lot of my decisions through a lens of I like starting at some very foundational things of like, I believe in a higher power. I believe that higher power is God. And I believe that he cares about me. And so I ask him what I should do about certain decisions.
Sure.
Or I would see people, this happens a lot in coaching industry. I see a lot for women, but also for men, of like, if you're going to join some kind of mastermind program to grow in your skills, it's like, put your money down right now. And if you don't believe in yourself enough to invest. And to me, that felt icky. I know it's an urgency.
A tactic.
It's a tactic. It's a method.
Sure. Yep.
But for me, when I would respond with like, hey, or someone wanted to say, I want to talk to my partner about this or pray about it, I'd be like, all for it. Yes. And so like, I encourage you to pray. I encourage you to like sit and meditate about building a business without debt. Like, and so my values came through differently when I was in these mastermind spaces, talking with peers, but also how I interacted with clients. And that one attracted better people who are aligned with me and how I want to do business. But people saw that I didn't carry some of the same stuff that other people did. And it set me apart. And it allowed me to have different conversations once we were in a client coach relationship to support them in different ways. Even if they weren't believers, I've worked with people who are very much on the opposite end of the spiritual spectrum, political spectrum than me. And we were able to have great conversations.
That's really neat. So what do you think are some of those, and you kind of hit on one, but what are some of those values that you take into business through the lens of a believer, someone who's passionate about discipleship?
So one example is just integrity and making sure like not overselling and making sure that things that I do for people are in alignment with who I am as a believer, the type of services I offer and things like that.
Sure.
But also just, I think probably that would be the main thing is like, I encountered in the marketing world, in an online digital space, there's so much hype. And I was sucked into things that I felt like were like a silver bullet. They were going to help me fix this one pain point in my journey in business. And even just being more honest about this isn't a silver bullet and talking to people in a more honest way about business journeys felt like just being different in that space. So I'd probably just say showing up in a way that was an integrity about who I was and where I was at in my stage of business, not versus like trying to position myself bigger than what I was, things like that.
Do you think that's ever cost you something? Because, you know, it's easy to paint that picture and go, and it all works out because we did something that aligned with our values and it was all blessed and it all worked out perfectly. And it turns out that was the silver bullet, you know, like, but have you ever felt like that didn't go the way that you thought it was going to go, but at the same time, you felt confident because you held true to something that you believed?
I think so. There's the temptation, right, of fake it till you make it. And I understand some of the psychology about that, like building your confidence.
Personal development, yes, all that world.
All those things. But yeah, there have been times where I've wanted to go after opportunities and or invest in things that just felt like they held a lot of appeal to me. And then just having to sit with, but could I stand in front of my parents, in front of my children, in front of my pastor, and know that there was still like I was in integrity for having participated in something.
Right. That's good. That's good. So how has this translated into ministry for you? Or how has this translated, because you are a business owner, but you're also this equally passionate about missions, you know, and just that personal growth and spiritual growth in an individual. So how have you made that transition? But I mean, from what I'm hearing from you, it doesn't sound like it's really been a transition. You are they're all playing a part together. You're not separating or siloing.
I was though initially. Okay. Like I mentioned, like I was afraid of failure, and I was like, what if I do sales in an icky way, or like I'm still learning my own voice in some of this stuff, and so I was siloed. Okay, and it took a while for me to feel comfortable about integrating those things and being open about like I'm a business owner and feeling comfortable with like labels and titles. Yes, and so now I would say I'm even more integrated. That probably started happening in 2020 as a result of uptick and realizing it was not serving me to keep things as siloed as they were, even though there was some overlap. And I was like, yeah, I do this and I do this. It felt like hats I was taking on and off.
Yes.
In this year, in January, I felt like I was supposed to take a moment of rest. We had been driving really hard at ministry and missions and building business. We had kids during COVID. And so it was like, I need to take a step back and downshift some of my business this past year. And as a result of that, I felt like, one, I became more, I started working from a place of rest instead of needing to constantly feel like I needed to rest from the work that I was doing. And I started to see ways that I was still siloed and could be more integrated. And the ways I started to bring some of the business skills that I had developed into the church was just through executive ability to see vision for the church. And for people who are being discipled in the church that maybe didn't have a very good pathway to develop their leadership skills because they maybe weren't an entrepreneur, but they had dreams and visions about things God was putting in their heart, but they didn't know how to get started. Well, I'm in brand foundations. Like, let's talk about your messaging, your values, like how do we bring all that together visually? So I'm like, yeah, let's pull that out of you, articulate that, and help teach you how to hear God's voice as it relates to your dreams and visions that God is giving you to do in the kingdom world. And so that's where it gets even more exciting to me about how to leverage skills that we tend to develop in business and leave in business and not bring into a church environment or our church community conversations. And so that's where I get most excited more these days.
Why do you think we're leaving those conversations out of church?
I think some people have done it in a way that feels gross and makes church feel too corporate. And so I think there's for some people, a gut reaction of like, ooh, yuck, that's not church. And yet I think if you swing the pendulum on the other side, it's not spiritual enough. To be so practical about some things. And I feel like there's this tension and not a lot of people have seen it modeled well. And so people tend to not do things that they don't know how to do. And like, just go try and figure it out. You have to be kind of wired a certain way to be willing to go try something and it not work out. So I think that's why it's lacking in this space because we haven't seen it done well. And there's not been space held for those conversations to happen because people who are leading churches in a traditional sense, they already have their tasks on their plate. That they wear traditionally. So,
that's good. So you took some time this year, created some space. What has emerged from this time, from this year? What are some very practical things that you're doing to navigate the different hats that you wear?
Some of it is reframing. I don't want to use the word like deconstructing and reconstructing, but changing language and lenses through which I see the work that I do. So whether that's the work of business or the work of ministry or the work of home and raising and discipling my children, giving myself permission, because some of this is just personal of I saw myself as a working parent and when I felt like the Lord told me to downshift, that was very uncomfortable for me because I worked so hard to build this thing. I didn't want to lose momentum. There is some little thing in the back of my brain of like, what are people going to think? They think I'm failing or quitting. But then I was like, whatever. Okay. But that stuff comes up, just to be honest, like it bubbled up in me.
Absolutely.
And I was like, okay, I need to change the language of like having kids as a sacrifice as well as a blessing. I started to feel weird about the word sacrifice, like making sacrifices to be home or making sacrifices to be able to work or making sacrifices. And I needed to change the language to trade-offs because these things are good. And I'm making an intentional choice about this good thing or this good thing. It's going to be a trade-off. And so shifting my heart posture around how I perceived the work, like ministry work is good. Being home with my kids and raising them and loving them into good humans is good. Yeah,
Yes.
all these things are good. But what's the good that I'm going to focus on right now? And what are the long-term consequences of me doing that or not doing that?
Mm.
And so language for me really impacts how I perceive what I'm doing.
Yes.
And so another example of that, even in like the marketing world, like marketing versus visibility. Like when I first got started, I hated the word marketing for whatever reason.
Yes.
But if I knew I had to get visible so people could buy what I was doing, I was like, well, yeah, I need people to see me.
That makes sense. Right.
And so a lot of it is the Lord is kind of, his yoke is easy and his burden is light. And I feel like this is the practical way that he does that for me, is he gives me language to change the culture of my heart and the culture of my home that I dwell in. So.
I think from you, I learned the word invited. And that's something that I have shifted, not perfectly, but like we get stuck in the like, I have to do this. I have to do this. I must do this, you know, and it's just like, it's so abrasive sometimes, you know, like how we view anything. But I learned from you to use the word like, I invite you to think about that. Or like, there's an invitation to consider this. And it was kind of mind blowing because you did this even when we were in a group together at Uptick, and like how I viewed reading the Bible. Like, this is an invitation to what God might be saying to you. And it was not like you need to find what what is he telling you? It's like not so just cut and dry. It's like it's an invitation to explore what God might be saying to you, you know, and we even use that though in the business, you know, like you're invited to consider a different style of leadership. It's just this invitation. It's kind of those words, like you're saying, are powerful because they're always kind of just, they're attractive. They like call you forward. It's more of a flow there instead of like this, you know, these words that they're not necessarily harsh in and of themselves, but it creates this, this hustle or like this tension or like you're kind of always
obligation and pressure.
Yes, pressure there. But words like that, like I think you're saying, they're just so powerful because words really frame how you operate as a person and how you operate in all these different roles, and whether or not it's going to be stress-filled and pressure-filled or whether it's just an invitation to be a human being and explore all the things God's put in your life. And it's a really nice way to operate in those, not gentler in a, but in a gentler way. And that's not a negative, you know.
No, it's not.
Peaceful.
The fruit of the Spirit is gentleness. And like the Spirit is gentle with us. And I think maybe this is American culture and context, but like we tend to hustle and work hard and be hyper aware of time.
Yes.
And I remember when someone first changed the language of, for example, when someone first gives their life to Jesus and they choose to follow the way of Jesus, a lot of times the church is like, well, now you need to quit smoking and you need to quit drinking, you need to quit sleeping with your girlfriend, you need to start reading your Bible, you need to start praying. Have you been in a Bible study? Who are you talking about? You know, and the list goes on and it feels like rules instead of like, hey, if you have questions, you can look in the Bible for that. That's a tool for you to evaluate your next decision. Or have you talked to the Lord? Have you considered praying about it? That's a tool to help you move forward in your life. And like, these things are tools, but too often in the church, they're presented as rules. And I think it's because those people know the goodness of God and they want that desperately for someone else. And in that desperation, maybe method like comes off wrong. But when we can change our lens on this thing from rules to tools, wow, that is high invitation. And if we try it, high grace, you guys talk about that in Ordinary Movement. And then it becomes like, well, this is my choice now. I have ownership over my ability to follow the way of Jesus, and it becomes more evaluative. I don't know if that's a word, but we're able to evaluate versus feel like, oh man, shame, condemnation. I should have, yada, yada, yada. That's not from the Lord. He has gifted us the Holy Spirit and these tools to help us move forward. And healing and transformation.
It's equipping.
It's equipping. And you see that in business, but we don't translate that into growth and leadership and in the Jesus followership in the church. And I've just seen that gap. And I love conversations that help to bridge that.
I love that. So take me over to, so I want to talk about home life. with you.
Yeah.
I mean, I know it's, we're two women here, we're two moms talking. And so I don't want to miss out on that because I know there's probably a lot of other moms that are watching that are entrepreneurial in the business space. Maybe they don't own their business. Maybe they're working moms. And these are good conversations to have, and so how have you, I don't like the word balance either. I like collaboration. How have you recalibrated life with kids while being passionate about ministry, missions, while working? How do you recalibrate that? And because you mentioned something earlier about how you are discipling your children. And I think that sometimes we don't want to miss that. I think it's easy for us sometimes to go, well, I need to be discipling that person. I need to be mentoring that person. I need to work. And for all of these people, we're giving so much out to others. And sometimes we miss that, like, we actually have a really great opportunity here at home to disciple and to practice what we preach. But sometimes we miss that, so what have been your findings around that topic?
Yeah. Some of it was recognizing that my demeanor was not reflecting, or maybe the quality of my fruit in my life was mediocre. I was mediocre in producing results for clients. I mean, I was getting the job done. Right. And I was producing deliverables and things, but I just wasn't showing up as my best self. And I would feel this pull, which I'm sure many mothers, it's a universal experience. For sure. I'm not giving enough to blank over here, and I'm not giving enough to my children over here. I'm not giving enough for my own self-care here, like just never enough to go around. And so marriage was okay. Nothing terrible or major going on, but just felt like, mediocre. Like just, same with ministry of like, I'm showing up, doing the work, but like, it was okay. Yeah. And I realized, I'm going to use a lot of garden metaphors here.
I love it. Bring it on. Yes.
But I felt like the Lord gave me a very specific word, which was to lie fallow. And that was an active form of rest, because when a field is lying fallow, the soil is being regenerated. Okay. Right. And I took time so I said no to a lot of clients. Okay. I said, I'm taking a pause. I'll probably be back in the fall. So I give them a timeline. Okay. But I just felt like I was depleted from my deeper well. Okay. And so I did some things to reflect on rhythms in our home, systems in our home. If I was supposed to continue with business or maybe make a shift, I just took time to pray and reflect and talk to God and say, here's what I'm feeling. What do you have to say about these things? And take time to listen. And I slowly started to feel myself become re-nourished, almost as if I was re-infusing the soil with nutrients. And the interesting thing about abiding and spending time with the Lord is that a vine does not squeeze out grapes. Like it doesn't need to squeeze out fruit with effort. Yes. And I love that visual. Yep. And initially, after you have a time of lying fallow, you need time to put down roots. You need time to grow stems. You need time to grow leaves before you produce fruit of significance. And it's interesting. We pruned our pear tree. We have a pear tree on our property. And we pruned it way back. We had so many pears last year. The branches were breaking. They were so heavy and laden with fruit. Wow. And this year we got 5 pears. But those pears were incredibly sweet. And I was like, okay, Lord, I hear what you're saying. Like there was so many ways the Lord was getting my attention. I started a garden. Oh, I love it. Nothing really grew.
Girl, been there. Yeah.
Except for things that just volunteered. Whatever the person that lived at the house before grew, it came back in abundance. I have loads and loads of squash, but I never planted it. And I felt like the Lord was saying, look what I can do. All the stuff you did in your own strength, Brittney, it was piddly. Yes. I got like a couple tomatoes and a couple cucumbers, but like nothing significant. And it was a lot of work. And so I felt like the Lord was just teaching me how to listen and be okay with a work that does not yet have anything to show for it, and be okay with process and effort, and that he looks at the heart. He sees the intention of the heart, and that's what he measures, not necessarily always the output of a thing. That matters, don't get me wrong. Right. But there are times and seasons to do the inner, deeper work. And so just feeling like I was now able to notice, because I held space for it in my brain,
Yes.
when things could be more streamlined in our home rhythms and flows, or we're overcommitted and we're not thriving as a family, or I'm not thriving personally. I'm an introvert. Alex is an extrovert.
Okay.
And so that's just a very practical dynamic of like,
Yeah.
I need at least an hour, like to just
Yep.
like have quiet and recalibrate my brain. So those are the things that emerged. And I've already noticed the quality in my relationship with my kids, the quality of communication with Alex, not a snippy with him, taking my stress out on him. I have resumed client work this fall. The joy there for me to be able to do that again, it's there. It wasn't there.
Oh, yeah. I love that.
I still liked working with clients, but it just wasn't there in the same way.
Mm.
And so those are the things that were produced out of a time of pause and rest and abiding.
Mm. You know what I think is interesting too, because when you first started talking and you were talking about taking a season to life fallow, you're taking time and you're talking about how, you know, it takes time to plant roots and it takes time to grow and to sprout. And in my mind, I'm just going, it takes time. It takes a lot of time. And sometimes that can be really intimidating when God asks you to lay something down, because you're like, how long? For how long? There's no timeline there. You know, he doesn't tell us like for the next 6 months, you know, and that would be easier, I think, if we knew, hey, could you just give me a sneak peek? How long is this going to be? And then we could, but you know, he knows best. Like then through that time, we'd probably just be like anxiously waiting to get to when we get to spring out again. Right.
Yeah.
But it's just that obedience of saying, yeah, I'm going to listen and be obedient. And growth takes time, but it doesn't always, I think sometimes we go, it's going to take all this time. It doesn't always take like years and years and years. Like here you are in the fall, you're back at it, you have more joy. So it's like, give yourself space and time to hear the Lord, abide in the Lord. That's not like a bad thing to do. That's a good thing to do. It's for our good.
Yeah.
And it's not, it might take time to get around to back to the business, if that's even where you're being directed to go. But it might not be as long as you think.
Right. And in the grand scheme of things, 6 months, 3 months, 9 months even, which I thought it was interesting that I went from January to September, which is 9 months of like development. Others will pick up on that.
I'm tracking.
Yeah. So it was kind of like, when you back up, nobody really like cared that I went absent for 9 months. Like,
Yes.
They didn't even notice. They didn't care. It was like, okay, great. Were there trade-offs for our family for me to do that? Yes. But we were in alignment that the value that would come from rest would be greater than any financial gain that we would have from me working for those 9 months across the board. And so I agree. It's uncomfortable. I had a sense of maybe summer, maybe fall, I would resume, but I wasn't sure. I was like, maybe I will get insight and realize I need to stay on a career pause even longer. But I won't have that clarity until I hold space to gain it. And it's very hard to slow down. And we often don't receive that message from inside the church. It's always like, well, what are you doing next? And what are you you need to do more, and you need to lead this, and you need to lead that. And it's like, whoa, I feel like the Lord is asking me to pause. And that can feel very countercultural in many church spaces.
Right. Yeah. Because if you're not working, then you have plenty of time to volunteer.
Yeah, you do.
But that doesn't mean you should, you know what I mean? But that's a hard, I'm not, doing much with my time, but I'm not volunteering either. And well, what? It creates this uncomfortability. So what did rest and pausing, what did that look like for you? Did that look like saying no to all the things?
It looked like saying no to all the things.
Wow.
And ironically, I ended up getting up at 5 a.m. to do reading, quiet time, intensive journaling for 90 days, specifically over the summer. It took me a little while because I kept being tempted to jump back into client work from January to June. And I was like, this is hard. But rest looked like, instead of volunteering for things or doing additional ministry stuff, I was gardening. I was building a garden, and I was getting my body outside, getting my brain from thinking about things, and investing in myself as a parent, investing resources into myself, reading books, and trying to shore up areas where I knew I needed resource and support, and so that I could be prepared and thrive.
Yeah.
So some of it looked like just changing my view from my screen constantly and thinking about business stuff or ministry stuff and thinking about how do I get this stinking plant to grow leaves, and stay watered.
Yes.
And so, I think that my brain just needed a refreshing. And so that was a very practical side of it, but also as an introvert, knowing I needed space. I have a friend, his name is Robbie, who talked about when does an orchestra tune up? Before the performance, right? So before the performance of the day, when am I tuning up my spirit and aligning things? And so my kids get up early, so that meant I needed to get up earlier. And that was a challenge, but I rose to it. I think I journaled. I only missed 5 or 6 days out of the whole 90.
Wow.
And showed up every day to the page, reading and reflecting and writing. And that's what abiding looked like for me as an active form of rest, because I'm not just like laying on the couch watching movies the whole time.
Right.
This was intentional nourishment.
That's good. So rest still looks like there's effort being made. Some major effort there, getting up before the kids.
Yeah.
I know that's a big one.
Yeah.
So it's like you said, rest does not equate to laziness. And I think sometimes in our culture, when we hear that rest, it's like, okay, you're resting, but there's space for that too, though. You know what I mean?
There is space for that
There's
too.
space for that, but it's also looking like actively abiding in Christ. There is activity. You're actively pursuing your relationship with Christ and things that are healing. You're pursuing that healing. You're pursuing that realignment.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we don't treat our spiritual health and wellness the same way we do physical health and wellness. And so if we visually see someone with a broken arm, we're like, you should probably go get that bone set before it heals that way. And then it causes more issues.
Right.
I don't think we know very well how to, recognize spiritual, even deficiencies like nutrient deficiencies, right?
Yeah.
We don't know how to recognize those things in people except to say, I can tell something's off. Maybe you should just go read or pray more, and those are great things.
Great things.
Tools, not rules.
Tools, not rules.
But also having someone have modeled that for me. I had a mentor who told me, Brittney, the holiest thing you can do as a new mom when I just had a baby was take a nap, because they understood that working from a place of rest is going to make me a better mom and a better model of Jesus than getting up and reading my Bible at 5 a.m. in the morning in that season, right? That was a different season, and I was needing sleep and rest. And so, I think it's just evaluating each season. I try to step back every 6 months and say what's working and what's not working for my rhythms across the board as an entrepreneur, as someone who's wanting to be involved in ministry and make active disciples who make disciples, and also show up well for my children and model Jesus to them in the day in and day out of life.
Right.
Like every 6 months or so, Alex and I will look at our calendar and say, did we do too much? Where were we depleted? Where were we feeling like we were scrambling? Do we need to make any adjustments? And we'll look at our calendar, make adjustments, and talk about what we should commit to or not commit to.
Okay. That's great. That's really practical.
Yeah.
I like that. And doing it as a couple. It's not just you, like you're a team, you're in it together.
Yeah.
And having, of course, that dynamic between the two of you. I mean, if that's off, that makes everything else off. You know what I mean? Like that has
a lot harder
in
for
alignment. Yeah, for sure. So you mentioned how you took some time off and like the world still ran. Right? Like, I think sometimes we're worried to like pull back and like pull the reins a little bit because we're like, everything's going to crumble apart. And we saw that even like in COVID, I feel like in 2020, when it's like all the people go home and work from home, or you're fired, for not being compliant in some areas. Like the world just still spins. And it moves on.
It does.
And also, it's still waiting for you when you get back. Like there's, it either moves on, but the work is still always there. Hey friends, we're going to interrupt the show just real quick to give a shout out to Ordinary Movement. Ordinary Movement is a disciple-making movement that is helping to equip churches and individuals all over the nation to start discipleship groups. Ordinary Movement is unique in that it has an online resource for you, so you can walk step by step through how to start a group, what to talk about in your group, and how to be a disciple who truly makes disciples. These high challenge, high grace environments are perfect for anyone. You don't have to have any previous experience, no matter what background you come from, no matter what profession you're in, you can be a disciple who makes disciples. Check out ordinarymovement.com for more information and to get started. Now back to the show. All right. So during this time that you had this pause on working on business, what did you learn in your time of being absent?
One of the things that I noticed about absenting myself from that is that I had had practice with that before. I had been trying to build a lot of different lanes in my business. And when I was in Uptick, which was a discipleship entrepreneurial training thing, I felt like I needed to shut one of those lanes down. And I put a lot of energy, effort, and financial investment into it. And it was so painful. But when I absented myself from that thing, I felt peace and other things flourished. And so I already had, since I had done that exercise, I had an expectation of fruit coming from this decision.
Okay.
Another thing was I had a really cool opportunity come up when I knew I was still supposed to be on pause, and I was very strongly entertaining it. Very cool, like world travel, leading this really cool thing on a global scale.
Yes.
And I was like, on paper, this is the perfect opportunity.
Yes.
And then when I asked the Lord about it, he said, I asked you to lie fallow. And I realized I needed to say no. And so I did.
Okay.
I still want it. I still want to do that one day. But I ended up going to another meeting for work at a different time. And there was a new team member who had accepted that opportunity. And I realized if I had occupied that seat, this person who was the perfect fit would not be sitting at the table and able to do the things that they needed to do.
Right.
I'd also been approached for other things like in ministry. And I realized if I occupy that seat, because that's been my general response of like, is there a gap? Yeah. Can I do it easily? Yeah. Okay. Then I'll just go ahead and do that. Fine.
Right.
But realizing like by stepping back and being obedient, other people have to step up. And that's a really interesting result, consequence, I don't know, of one, being obedient, but two, like really taking the time not to volunteer for everything. Right. And be aware of when your personal rhythms of working and resting, whatever arenas those are in, need to shift. And so not occupying positions that God is calling other people to can be a benefit of resting yourself.
Yes, that's so good. So when you look now, maybe compared to the beginning of the year and where you're at now, where's the shift in priority? Would you say there's been a shift in priority? And if so, kind of what does that look like for you now?
Yes. Short answer, shift in priorities. That happens again every 6 months or so because we're reevaluating about what's working. And just on, like, from a practical standpoint, like if you're a parent, phases of children will force you into different rhythms of sleep and work and whatever. So priorities have shifted again. And some of that has to do with where our kids are at and focusing on home. For me, it feels like anybody else can succeed in that spot in ministry at this time. Anybody else can build a business. I can rebuild my business at any time like I'm doing now. Right. But I cannot recapture these very precious moments to instill things. And so priority is home, rhythm, life. Right. Priority is mom's health and wellness. So I show up well. Right. If I start to feel overwhelmed, I'm definitely going to back off. Okay. Or we're going to hold extra space for mom. Right. To have maybe an extra hour or so here and there on the calendar. Right. For restorative activity for me. And sometimes, prioritizing health and wellness also looks like holding extra space for cooking dinner because we're trying to do more healthy meals. Yep. And not living such a fast-paced life where we were just trying to get calories in to survive. Right. Yes. Which that happens, and that's life. But intentionally holding space for more sustainable practices in our home and getting those rhythms down really well as like ingrained muscle memory habits. Yeah. As a family, it feels like this is an important time to do that. And so if I can do that for myself, model that for my kids, I trust that that will have positive ripple effects down the road.
Yeah.
And business can always come back. Ministry can always come back. So for me, in this next 6 months, I'm focusing on those things.
In this next 6 months.
Yeah.
I love that. So as a practical tip for the parents out there, dads and moms who feel like my life is so fast paced, I'm busy. That word is everywhere. I'm busy, busy, busy. You just don't understand. We have a lot going on. Like, what would your encouragement be to them? Would it be to, hey, maybe you need to reevaluate every 6 months and step back? Like at some point, you have to go, what's serving you?
Yeah.
And what's not serving you? These are all good things. Are they the great things? What would be your encouragement for them to kind of take that step to maybe reprioritize?
Yeah. I am a huge advocate of reflecting on your rhythms of life. There's a couple key areas in which I do that. Okay. There's my daily rhythm when I get up, when I go to bed, when I start my work day, whatever, even if that's working in the home space as a mother. My shutdown routine for home and the kids, and then my weekly rhythms, my more big annual rhythms of rest. Like, am I taking an extended weekend off to go hiking with the kids and Alex? Yeah. Or are we planning a vacation? Are Alex and I building in time for dates or time away, even if it's an hour, just for uninterrupted conversations?
Right.
And looking at those things with regularity.
Yeah.
And paying attention to the quality of life in home, because at the end of the day, that's really like core. It's going to have huge ripple effects everywhere for all of the family. Even if you're an individual and you don't have children or parents or whatever in your home, that's still going to have ripple effects into your workplace. And so looking at those, the quality of life, am I eating well? Am I sleeping well? Because then we're not going to be able to produce quality fruit
100%.
in our lives. Yep. So looking at those rhythms, and it's okay to make adjustments for 3 months. 90 days is really very quite fast. Yes. 90 days of 5 a.m.s were hard, but worth it for me. I tried to continue that into the fall. I could not get myself out of bed.
Still doing it.
No way. No way.
Everything for a season, right?
Yeah. It served a purpose. I like that.
A purpose. Yes.
It was a tool to help me evaluate. It was a tool. I don't need that tool anymore. Yeah. Right. I put it back in my tool bag. I know I have it there. Sometimes I'll still spend an early Saturday morning and do that and check in before the kids get up. But it's a tool now. Yeah. Versus like kind of like a protocol for like wellness for the doctor. Like, so yes, taking time, looking at the calendar and being very honest about what's feeling good, what's not, what can you truly take off of your plate, even if it feels like a loss. I would encourage you to examine, like, is this feeding something in me, like approval or validation or my ambition or my appetites?
Wow. Yeah.
Why do I feel like I can't let this thing go? Right. Part of me not being able to let go of my business easily was like approval and what people think of me, right? It came up and it like niggled my brain and I was like, ugh, this is uncomfortable. Yes. But at the end of the day, I don't care about that. I care about what Jesus thinks of me and the fruit that I'm producing in my life and in my kids. So I am going to make this decision and trade off. Right. So if you're having a hard time and you don't see what you can take off of your plate, that would be my next layer of questioning of like, well, what is this thing serving in your life? And it's okay if it's hard to let go of and you're struggling with it, but now you've identified it and now you can get support around it. And so some of it's just taking time to pause, look, and be honest with yourself about where you're spending your time. For me, I was scrolling too much on social media. Yep. Like that was not serving me. Yeah. So I cut it completely out over the summer. It was good.
What is that? Okay. Because I'm sure there are people out there. Yeah. I've been curious about this. I know there's other people out there that are curious. What if I just went off grid? Or what if I just stopped the scroll? What if I got offline completely? What happens, Brittney?
For me, I was able to, well, it reduces comparison. Yep. It makes me feel like I'm not missing out on business opportunities. It makes me feel like I can actually see the blessings right in front of me.
Mm-hmm.
I was able to be more content. I did not feel like I needed those new pair of shoes or that really cute jacket or whatever the thing is.
Mm-hmm.
My attention span, my whole body and brain just felt calmer. We're not designed for so much input.
Yeah.
Like we were only designed for urgency and fear and scary things for when tigers were coming at us, you know?
Right. Yeah.
And so to be bombarded with chaos in the world and, appetite for things or opportunities, it just overwhelms our brains, I think. And it drowns out the voice of the Lord. And it makes it harder to hear him.
Yeah.
So it increased my hearing, increased my presence, my peace, and my productivity probably.
Yeah. But you still have a business, because I think that's the scary part for people who are in business. They're going, I can't get offline. I can't get off this hamster wheel of being online because that reduces business.
I did not build my business in a way that made me dependent on online visibility.
Okay.
And I did a lot of word of mouth.
Okay.
And I have a lot of clients who I love and they love me and they were supportive of me. And a lot of that had to do with the work that I did of identifying who I wanted to work with, the alignment. Remember the stuff I talked about at the beginning of doing things that were in alignment with me and my values. And that still enabled me to work with people across the aisle from me on multiple subjects.
Sure.
But it still attracted people who valued that I valued those things.
Mm-hmm.
And so as a result, I had clients who were like, yeah, duh, take a break, Brittney.
Yeah.
And let us know when you come back online.
Yeah.
I even ran into someone at the pumpkin patch the other day and like, are you coming out of retirement soon? Because I need you to do this thing for me. And I was like, soon.
Yes.
And so for that reason, I had a trust because I knew I'd built relationships and my business in a way that I could. I mean, there was still cost to it, to shutting it down. Momentum is lost, visibility opportunity is lost. But it was worth it. It was worth it.
Yeah, and it was worth it for your values.
For the values and the trade-offs.
Yeah.
But that is a legitimate fear, a legitimate concern. I think there are ways to do that. I've seen plenty of women take off for maternity leave for 6 months in their business, remain visible online because they built a small team of 1 or 2 people part-time and they helped sustain things. But they were clear on their goals, their values, that they wanted to be present for a certain amount of time. And you can build your business in a way that serves your life and goals. And that's why I'm so passionate about building a business that is around your life on your terms.
Right.
And you can do that. We have so many opportunities to do that today.
Yes. That's so good. So good. Anything else you would add about anything we've talked about today? Anything else in this discipleship space you want to mention, or about incorporating that in your business?
Yeah. I would encourage people, if you feel like God is putting something in your heart and maybe you don't feel like you're an entrepreneur, or if you want to use church language, like very apostolic, but you're looking for a lane to run in and you don't see that path forward, trust that there is one, and that you might have to do some uncomfortable things to get out there, but start talking about it, because there are people like myself in church community that care and want to see you thriving in the things that God is calling you to do.
Right.
And also know that sometimes there's a timing thing with that.
Sure.
Maybe it's a dream for the shelf for another 2 years. But, if you're feeling like you can't even imagine having the bandwidth to take on one more thing, but you feel like God's putting it on your heart, that's an invitation to evaluate with tools. Is there stuff in my life that is affecting my rhythm and ability to go after the things of God? Is there something impeding that? And reflect. And, everything's an invitation with God. And when there's a high invitation, there's also high grace. And I think that you can trust that He's calling you to do that. He's going to provide a way and a path forward for you to do that. And so be encouraged and do not be afraid. You're going to have non-linear growth, and that's part of the process. So I think that I would leave you with, if you have a dream or a vision, lean into that, abide, and ask the Lord when, how, where, and keep going for it.
I think it's really powerful. You have to ask. You're not going to know unless you ask, right? And so we think we have all these ideas, And a lot of times we're just like, God, here's my idea. Is good with you? All right, I'm going to go get it done, instead of doing that part first.
Oh, yeah.
The abiding, the sitting, the asking, the listening, and not telling him what we're doing. The asking.
I've done that a couple of times. It doesn't always work out in my favor. So, yes, that is wisdom. Listening, abiding. It's worth it. Resting.
Absolutely. Well, Brittney, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm always so encouraged listening to you, Brittney. Thank you for coming on. I hope you got some encouragement out of today too. No doubt you did. Thank you again for joining us here on Discipleship in the Marketplace. If you like this, stick around, like, subscribe, and check out the next great video. I will see you next time for the next great conversation.